Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I've got the model that the Democratic Party should follow for its 50-state strategy. It's called the Center for Popular Democracy, and it's a national organization which partners with 48 organizations in 30 states. And working together, they advance an innovative, pro-worker, pro-immigrant, racial and economic justice agenda. Tony Perlstein coordinates the center's organizing and campaign support on economic justice and workers' rights initiatives. And he's my guest today, so welcome.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thanks so much for having me.
I had to tell you, I interviewed Andrew Friedman, who is now a co-director of the center, when he was a co-director of Make the Road by Walking. And I was so impressed with this organization because it was a very local organization in Brooklyn. And it took all of these people who had common causes and desires and really developed their own ability to affect the government or whatever it was, the conditions that they wanted to improve, right?
Yeah.
And so successful that now we have this national organization. So you've got a lot of local partners. Tell me a little bit about how it all operates.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of our partners, we have 44, 48 partners in 30 states. They are rooted in local communities, and they're all mostly membership-based organizations. In other words, organizations that sort of ordinary people in local communities join and sort of participate in the life of the organization. And for us, that's really important as the model. It's an organization that's driven by its membership. So I think we believe that our theory of change is that that change is rooted in state and city and local work. That it takes that kind of active and organized membership to make change happen. So, I mean, Make the Road model that they developed here in New York and then is spread to a few other regions is what they call a high-touch model. There are many different ways that people can come into their organizations, many different ways that people get contacted and reach, and then become active in the life of the organization and help build the community. And a community of struggle, really, a community that allows people to step up, allows people to speak their minds, allows people to take action politically and locally, and that's really what we're about.
So it's a prime example of civic engagement, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the basic ingredient for it all.
Yep. And I would say the national organization, the Center for Popular Democracy, comes out of several different organizing traditions. There's a tradition that's really rooted in the Black and African American community that comes out of some of the old ACORN organizing. There's an immigrant rights and immigrant worker organizing tradition that's sort of represented by Make the Road. And then there are some partner organizations that were sort of more coalitional in nature, but now are building membership that come out of things that are like the Fight for 15 and the Fight for a Fair Economy.
15 being the minimum wage.
15 minimum wage fights.
Right. So what happens? Does the center develop, I mean, is the center there as a reference for these local organizations and a support system, and your responses are initiated in response to their questions and needs? Or do you do it the other way?
I think it's a combination. I think that we are setting up structures so that we can be very responsive and sort of pull together both organizations that are local, have the ability for organizations to communicate with one another, express interests, desires, create a strategy that is activated and actualized by the national organization, and at the same time there are initiatives that come from the national organization, from folks and staff that can see sort of all the things that are happening in the country and that are sort of shared back to the partner organizations locally. The center works in a couple different ways. We have campaigns that we run, things like you mentioned, like the Fight for 15, minimum wage, fair scheduling, earned sick time, initiatives around immigrant rights, municipal ID, so things like of that nature. And then there's capacity support that we provide partners. So we help our partners sort of grow and deepen and sort of strengthen themselves in a variety of different ways. So we have staff that talk to those partners about what are their plans over the coming year, how do you strengthen your organization, what's your organizing model, how are you pulling new members in, how do you develop leaders, how do you organize money in such a way so that you can sustain yourself. And so we sort of have those capacities, and then at the national level we have the campaigns, and then we do campaign support work. So we have a communications team, a research team, and other folks that sort of lend that kind of support for the local organization.
How do you get funded? How do you have the money?
Well, we have a couple different
And how
initiatives.
do the local organizations?
Much of our work is supported. Much of our work is supported by foundations, but we also have contracts with unions and other types of work. And then we are really trying to build out a self-sustaining model. So that's in some ways some of the most interesting work is how do you organize members, pull them into your organization, and charge a certain amount of dues so that members actually have some ownership over the local organization. So we have a couple of initiatives. One we call the Sustainability Initiative, where we're trying to figure out if you can fundraise a certain amount based on a canvas of communities so that they get pulled into the organization. There's sort of online fundraising that many people are experiencing. And we're in a new political moment in which many folks in local geographies are looking to get active and engaged, and we're hoping that we can test out some new ideas and theories on how to do that.
So this is the good thing that Donald Trump has caused or is doing, right?
I guess it's the silver lining, although there aren't many.
If there, but you've been able. I mean, all these organizations are benefiting from it, aren't they? With all the contributions and the number of people who want to do something.
I think that's actually the challenge before us. I mean, I think what we see at the national level and many of our local partners see is there's both an opportunity but also a real challenge for organizations that aren't set up to sort of be super active in a movement moment. So how do you both be nimble and respond to the constant need to sort of defend your communities, to be out and to protest, and at the same time build? So I think a lot of the things that we are trying to figure out right now is actually how do you make this movement moment, how do you convert this movement moment into an organization building opportunity so that you're growing not just yourself but other organizations within the movement so that we come out of this moment, come out of this anger, come out of this sort of frustration in a stronger and better place. So.
Do you look at Occupy Wall Street as a lesson? I think I would say, I don't know, it's a model, but it isn't really a model because they didn't. Or maybe it was a model and that was one of its problems, is that it had multiple goals. But the one thing that impressed me about it was they shunned the political action. They didn't like politicians. I think they had contempt for the political system. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think we recognize that the political system is not working for working people. It's not working for communities of color, and it hasn't for a long time. That doesn't mean it isn't an area in which you don't engage and you don't choose to fight at particular moments. So I think, the thing that Occupy Wall Street did incredibly well was change the conversation in the country. It changed the narrative. And so that's a big piece of sort of broad-based change that we need to sort of make sure it happens again.
Was it Trump, though, that's changed the narrative now? Caused the change?
No, I don't think so. I think
a wider group.
There have been fundamental economic and racial inequality in this country that had not been addressed for many years, and in many ways, those are the things that underlie this election cycle. Trump is, of course, creating a crisis that we all feel obligated and feel like it's our duty to respond to, lest our communities be harmed in any number of ways. But I think really the challenge before us is now how do we take this fear, convert it into organizing energy, and take that organizing energy and build it into lasting change. And I don't think there's a straight line, and I think there are different kinds of experiments that we all need to sort of try in local areas. There are canvases, there's new sort of technology that people are using, but we can't forget sort of the things that we did well. The hard conversations in communities, identifying people that actually lead in their communities, pulling those people into organizations so that we end up stronger, so that we have a vehicle to help people interpret the change that's going on around them and actualize and make real some of the things that they want to see in the world.
But basically also to elect people who will reflect your positions. I mean, it's an opportunity, it seems to me, to take over.
It's absolutely an arena of struggle. Right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that's
really what I meant. Yeah.
There are a few arenas of struggle that we can afford to cede to the other side. So the electoral arena is one of those, and we need leaders that are coming up through communities to take on local seats, to be trained so that they can take on higher seats. That's always been true. I think there's a lot of focus on the electoral, but there's also, I feel like we need to be thinking about the organizing work in our local communities in order to make that change.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I think you're one of the most relevant groups around today, right? And look at the Democratic Party. I mean, well, it's Washington, 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 and suddenly everybody is talking about their 50-state strategy. Well, they can't just move in and do it. They're
Yep.
going to need to partner with people like you.
Yeah, and I think,
attract them.
and we're all going to need to find folks who are local leaders, who are feeling and are impacted by the changes that are taking place around them. Help those folks figure out how they can build organization and build a strategy and make that real in lots more places.
It almost goes deeper, doesn't it? I mean, I remember early on saying you need more women for public policy. You know, how do you know what it's like to go marketing in the local thing or the street corner lights in the schools and everything else? So then the civil rights, we needed more people of color. But now we just need more people who know their communities and have the goals that we have, right? So it's
Absolutely.
It's just a different vein. So what are your major issues when you talk about economic equality or economic justice? You had all these great issues for working people. I mean, and when we saw these demonstrations around the country for regular scheduling of jobs or minimum wage and everything, that was you guys?
Well, I mean,
And
us
with your
and,
partners,
and,
with
and
your
lots of
partners.
other folks
Right.
are participating. I mean, in many
When
places.
I say you guys, I mean it, all the people working together.
Yeah, I mean, there are a set of national organizations and progressive unions that have been part of these fights across the country, and we're a piece and a part of that. I think our organization and our affiliates, particularly organizing communities and low-income communities of color around the country, have brought that voice to bear in lots of these fights. I mean, the Fight for 15 here in New York started with New York Communities for Change, which was this sort of organizing group that started together with SEIU and led the first protests, and those spread. And many of our partners either participated in some places, helped coordinate the local coalitions, helped drive some of those campaigns in others. It depended on the geography and the sort of constellation of groups that were there. You know, lots of our groups are working on a sort of range of issues that impact low-income communities. Again, I think if there's a low-income person, they don't just necessarily experience the world as it's my wages, or it's my salary, or it's paid family leave, or it's childcare. It's all of these things added together. How people sort of experience the world at the same time that they're experiencing racist policing or sort of unjust immigration laws. So, I mean, I think part of what CPD does, Center for Popular Democracy does, is because we're multi-issue, we really are able to engage people on a range of issues, but really in the way that people experience the world, not in sort of silos, but as a whole person impacted by all these issues.
Right. And it's interesting that you find people all across the country that have similar interests or empathy for each other. Is it a myth that you can't get everybody together?
I think it's a myth, but it also takes work. It's not necessarily and work and organization. So
More than just rhetoric.
more than just rhetoric, it takes bringing people together. I mean, from my union days and experience, you know, I mean, it's when workers were in a room with each other, met each other, built a community together, that then they were prepared to sort of stand up for each other in a real way and act on solidarity. And I think we sort of operate in a similar principle. So last year in Pittsburgh, we had our first ever what we called the People's Convention, which brought our affiliates from across the country, and we took action together in Pittsburgh. And again, it was sort of the start of like, we need to bring our groups together. People need to be in conversation with each other. Leaders of our different membership bases need to be in conversation. It needs to not just be directed from the top, but there needs to be engagement across. So I can pick up my phone from New York and call my friend in California, or in Denver, Colorado, or in Washington and Seattle, or in Illinois, and sort of say, hey, we're trying out this idea. What are you doing? So that, and the more of those connections that exist, and the more that happens, the stronger we'll be.
And the stronger the relationships, yeah. So you're a union organizer, essentially.
I mean, that's where I sort of
Yeah.
learned the trade, so to speak.
You
I was a
graduated from college.
Yep.
And then what did you do? You worked for strawberry pickers, did I see?
I worked with the farm workers for
Farm
a period
workers.
of time during the strawberry campaign as they were building committees at Driscoll and a few of the other shops. And then I worked with a couple Teamster locals, sort of smaller Teamster locals that were rank and file led. And I spent 3 years in Eastern Washington organizing meatpacking workers. Rank and file slate of mostly immigrant meatpackers had taken over, led a wildcat strike, and then took over their local. And then we ran a bunch of campaigns around safety in the meatpacking plants in Eastern Washington and Oregon and the food processing plants out there.
Did you have a lot of immigrants working there?
Yeah, I mean, the
it-
meatpacking plants were almost entirely immigrant. The largest were Mexican and Chicano. And then there were refugees from the Sudan and others that the companies brought in Vietnam. And there was a handful of Bosnians that had been brought in. And I mean, the companies deliberately brought in different ethnic groups to create divisions, and it was sort of the work of the union to sort of build unity across those and sort of take on the employer.
So the Teamsters has always been a total mystery, I think, at least to me. But the locals really can operate a little kind of independently.
I mean, I think with all unions, you have your locals and you have your internationals. I mean, locals have their own membership base and therefore their own leadership. And if members elect a leadership, they can sort of carve out a program. But that's all politics. It's all end up working out. I mean, I think the movement that I was in as part of the Teamsters was trying to build more and more locals of rank and file members who controlled their locals and were willing to engage and take on employers on behalf of the members' interests. You know, and sometimes there's a long tradition in the labor movement of sort of rank and file trade unionism, a belief in a strategy that, you know, the only way you're going to be powerful enough to take on the employers if members feel like the union belongs to them, if members own and develop and sort of develop the strategy of their own locals. And so
it's a similar philosophy, isn't it?
I would say so.
It's even a similar philosophy to political parties,
Yep.
the whole thing, the secret of success. But then you landed up in the docks. I love that.
I did. There was when I left Walla Walla in the Tri-Cities, Washington, I came back to New York, and there was a moment in which an outsider could get hired. And so the leadership of a local union had been arrested because they were corrupt, and then I got a job working in Bayonne, on the docks in Bayonne, and spent 10 years there working with rank and filers in my own local, and then coordinating with a group of mostly African-American dock workers from Charleston, South Carolina, and across the South who had led a big fight in the late 90s to beat back a non-union employer and fight off a racist state attorney general in South Carolina.
So when you have a job and you have to work a certain number of hours doing your job, so when you do your union work, that's over and above your working hours?
When I was a rank and filer,
Or do you get time off?
Well, when I was a rank and file, I mean, when we eventually took over the leadership of the local union, and I stayed a working officer, so I would work half-time as the secretary-treasurer of the local, and then half-time I would remain on the docks, and I would talk to workers on the docks during my job. And prior to becoming a union officer, we would do that on our own time, and do that on breaks, and do that in the break rooms, and take time off of work and travel up and down the East Coast talking to workers at the different ports.
It's interesting. Let's go back to the issues at hand. One of them was the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. Where do we stand with that today?
The sort of politics
Let's explain.
of So the campaign originated as an idea that someone had read Lawrence Goodwin's The Populist Moment, which was about the populist uprising and the demands on the Federal Reserve Bank to keep money more liquid so that there'd be more circulation in the economy so people could stay employed. And later there was developed the full employment mandate. So the idea was that the Fed should really be focused on the full employment mandate, not on raising interest rates to combat inflation, particularly when inflation was sort of non-existent. bankers and wealthy people wanted to raise interest rates to sort of increase the value of their money, and at the same time, we in our communities wanted to keep interest rates low so that we could strive toward the full employment goal and keep money circulating in the economy. So for many years, for the last couple of years, the campaign has had an incredible amount of success, sort of driving the narrative that who does the Fed represent? It needs to be more racially diverse. It needs to be representing the interests of the communities of working people rather than the interests of bankers and wealthy folks. So that had been the trajectory of the campaign up until this election, and now we're sort of in a crisis moment in which we're watching, I think, lots of Wall Street deregulation potentially take place, Dodd-Frank being eviscerated, potentially the full employment mandate at the Fed. And so I think the campaign is currently pivoting to trying to address all these inequities that we're seeing coming down the pike.
How do we do that? I mean, you're going to get, how do you do it? The Fed is, I guess, is spread across the country. So do your local affiliates also join that campaign?
Well, the Fed has 12 regional banks and then the Board of Governors. So we had campaigns in the different regions, and again, each of those regions, in theory, represent every one of the states, but they're housed in particular local geographies. And then there's the Federal Board of Governors. So the campaign itself was organizing workers and working people in those geographies to call on the Board of Governors to go visit our communities, call on them to sort of increase the diversity, and essentially had an ally in Janet Yellen who was picking up on the campaign and sort of echoing some of the interests of the campaign. I think now it remains to be seen which direction and which way we're going to go. I think we have to address all of the sort of deregulation that's coming down the pike on Wall Street, and if they do eviscerate the full employment mandate at the Fed, it's going to create havoc in the economy for working people.
That conflict between the people, especially the people that you're working with a lot, and Wall Street is so deep and so astonishingly stark. Why can't we accomplish something? Why can't we shame these people? I guess shame doesn't happen, right?
Well, I think it comes back to the earlier conversation that we had, which is that we need more people in motion. The power that we've got are the numbers of people who belong who make up our community, that make up the workplace. Their strength is money, their strength is lawyers. We need to figure out how to put people in motion in a much bigger way. People need to be active. We need to find vehicles for them to be active and express their interests. I think, there are two sides to the inequality coin. They're sort of raising the floor, but then there's really Wall Street has been an extractor of wealth from our communities for a long time, and the gloves were sort of taken off with deregulation, and we started to see some regulation come back in, and now we're going to see the gloves come off again. So without large numbers of people in motion, it seems that's the thing that's going to drive change.
How are you going to how do you cooperate, or how do you work together with these more or less spontaneous demonstrations? How do you mobilize the whole thing together?
I think the truth is, and again, coming back to some of the stuff we said earlier, how do you be nimble and yet build organization? This is something that we don't have the answer to, and we're trying to figure out. I think the truth is most protests, demonstration don't come out of nowhere. You'll often, when you start scratching the surface, find people who came through one of the organizations, or came through a union, or came through helping spark or lead or provide some direction in these movements. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're concerned with how do you build organizations and institutions that train people, that provide people skill sets, that give people experience in such a way so that when there are these movement moments, those folks are in a position to help lead, to help direct, to provide support for movement moments. The truth is, it's people's energy and the moment that will provide the energy. It's the people power that will provide the direction and the shape. But without people that have certain experience and skill sets, trying to actualize that change becomes difficult.
So the people who are trying to denigrate or trying to minimize the impact of all these recent demonstrations and stuff say, well, everybody's paid. I think somebody somebody had done this thing about require somebody to lay out something like $60 million to have paid everybody $25 on the day, that kind of stuff. And nobody's doing that. But nobody denies that the demonstrators aren't paid, but you need to have people to mobilize and organize.
I think
the most important thing.
Demonstrators certainly aren't paid. There are some people that are paid organizers,
Sure,
but I think
that's
all of
nothing
us
wrong.
are.
That's great.
Absolutely, and all of us are trying to figure out how do we develop a political consciousness with a larger number of people. I mean, I think that's, more people have to have a sense of organization and how you build in order for us to sort of realize change. Because right now there are sort of these explosions of people and energy. How do we keep that momentum going for the long haul? How do we make sure that in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, we're actually in a position, not just still banging at the gates, but we're ready to be inside and exercising power.
All right. So has there been a meeting between people like you and the Democratic National Committee, for instance?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we've actually met with the DNC, and I'm not sure that.
They should meet with you.
I guess speaking on behalf of myself personally, I think there's a lot more pushing and fighting that needs to happen before we're in a position to really.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But they need to follow the way you're doing it.
I would argue definitely, and if they know it's good for themselves, they will. Because I think, like we were saying earlier in the conversation, the things that happened during the election had precursors, had antecedents that are going back years now. People's frustration with the economy, people's frustration with the sort of racist police policies that are going back to the war on drugs. These are not things that are new.
And the distrust in the government, I think.
Democrats in some ways, are as responsible as Republicans for that history. And we need a new direction within the Democratic Party as much as we need.
Right. But you're essentially not a politician. I'm a politician. I'm trying to take advantage, I'm trying to make the marriage. But I know it'll take a long time and a lot of work and a lot of education. But thank you so much for coming and so
My
much
pleasure,
good luck
Ronnie.
to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We at CUNY TV always like to hear from our viewers. So if you have any subjects you'd like to explore or people you'd like to hear, please let us know. Write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or go to our website, cuny.tv, and click on Contact Us. We look forward to hearing from you.